What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. Have you ever wondered why the Western world has such a visceral response to communism? Because communists used to be a big thing in America. Like, they had parties and they were really pushing it, right? Have you ever wondered why they have a fear of communism, socialism, and what connection it has to the abolition of slavery? Because remember, all these are economic systems, economic engines that run nations, right? Slavery was an economic engine that ran corporations that developed and ran nations, right? Feudalism is an economic engine, right? Communism is an economic engine. Socialism, economic engine. These are all different ways human beings have structured, right, the consumption and purchase of goods and services in order to power its economies, right? So slavery, like anything else, was a very successful, very brutal, very barbaric, but it was very successful, as America is the only nation like itself that has the economic power and might to project itself across the world the way it has done, right? And it can only be done by that economic format of slavery, just like in Dubai, right? Their economic format is a form of slavery, right, that they have going on there. All the Middle Eastern countries are growing economically through slavery and oil, right? They just name it something else, right? And there's various other countries that have forms of slavery that has been turned into something else, that has been modernized in order to economically run their countries, because slavery is the best, it's the most barbaric, but it's the best form to generate income, because you don't have to pay, your workers, and you get 100% profit. Your overhead is very low, right? Now we're about to move into this new form of slavery, which will be, autonomous, automatic, robotic slavery, where now they have created their own artificial slaves that will be able to work even harder than even human beings can work, right, for the corporations, right, to generate economic income, which is going to leave all the people who are not being cogs in that machine disenfranchised. Because once these robots and these digital robots, as AI, become the economic slave, the main drivers of production, then that leaves the rest of humanity out, because we're no longer useful, right? Because you don't have to pay us insurance. We don't need liability, all that. So security, policing, everything will be justified using robots and automation. And technology is going to start to turn, and the structures of how society works is going to start bending towards these robots and these AI and the new artificial slaves. That's going to be the future of, of economic growth, right? And the question is it going to benefit everybody who is not an economic slave, right? We know in the past, it has not benefited everybody who were either outside of the economic slave class, because you were still a serf, you were still poor, you were still not useful to the powers that be, right? So you usually suffered, whether or hardship, right? So what's going to happen in the future? What are we going to have to change? Because clearly capitalism is not working. As much as we have been programmed to believe that capitalism came out of the Bible, and Jesus Christ said we must be capitalistic, which is the worship of money, the pursuit of money at all costs, hustle, 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 hustle mentality. It's not working for everybody, right? But also communism and socialism, and everybody wearing the same brand clothes and everybody going to the same place and house looking the same and walking around like manufactured goods, that's not going to work either. So, we got to figure something out. But I think in order to do that, we have to understand the big swings in history, right? And the big economic changes in history, and how the abolition of Africans and communism, how they coincide with each other. So we're going to learn a little bit about that right now. Anyway, tell me what you guys think in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
Well, in some of my more recent work, I've tried to point out that one cannot understand anti-communism, the fear of socialism, without understanding the abolition of slavery. That is to say, the abolition of slavery in the United States, 1865, as a result of a bloody civil war that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands on these shores, also led to one of the most significant expropriations of private property without compensation. That is to say, the 4 million enslaved Africans in the 1860s were worth billions of dollars. Unlike in the British Empire, where the slave owners were compensated, after their property was liquidated the value of their property was liquidated. In fact, there are stories that suggest that the descendants of the slave owners in London were only ultimately paid off in the 21st century because of the enormous sums involved. We know that one of the handicaps that the Haitian Revolution faced, that continues to suffocate that nation to this very day, is that the victorious regime post 1804 was forced to pay reparations to the enslavers. That did not happen in the United States of America. And so what happens is that you have a lot of fury and anger in Dixie, in the South, when their property was taken without compensation. It helps to give rise to the Ku Klux Klan, these terrorists who rampage throughout the South, eventually spread their tentacles from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I would also argue that post-1917, with the Russian Revolution, which also involves, it is thought, a seizure of private property without compensation, that leads to a confluence, that leads to this idea that socialism is the menace that will lead to a liquidation of private property, a seizure of private property without compensation, and then that gives rise to this hysteria about the Socialist Party, about the Communist Party, about individuals like Du Bois and Paul Robeson and their intentions. It also conveniently, for some, I should say, then helps to undergird this attack against social progress generally. Because if the communists are said to be against Jim Crow, that means that anti-communists should be in favor of Jim Crow. It almost reaches ludicrous and ridiculous lengths. I've suggested that if the communists are against tooth decay, perhaps you should be in favor of tooth decay. So anti-communism becomes a reigning philosophy in the United States in the 1950s. But alas, what happens is that it runs into this international situation whereby the United States is trying to compete for hearts and minds in the developing world at a time when it's trying to maintain Jim Crow and trying to maintain a kind of apartheid system against black people in particular. And that yields, that apartheid system yields, at least in the formal sense. But as noted, it also leads to the tossing overboard of the most stalwart leaders in our community, speaking of the aforementioned W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson et al.
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan!
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.